The splash echoed across the canyon as Adelaide Vaughn kicked off her boots and plunged into the rushing river, her skirts billowing around her legs like a drowning flower. And Aaron Nichols dropped his reins mid-stride, because he had never seen anything quite so reckless or beautiful in all his 26 years riding the California high country. The calf was bawling, swept downstream by spring runoff from the Sierra Nevada snowmelt, its white face barely visible above the churning brown water. Aaron had been watering his buckskin gelding at the river's edge when the young woman appeared from the cottonwood grove, carrying a basket of wild herbs. She had taken one look at the struggling animal and made her decision in the space of a heartbeat. "Miss, wait!" Aaron shouted, but she was already waist-deep in the current, her dark auburn hair coming loose from its pins as she fought against the water. The river was running fast in late April of 1872, swollen with melt and treacherous as a sidewinder. Aaron cursed under his breath and followed her in. The cold hit him like a fist, stealing his breath, but he pushed forward, his boots finding purchase on the rocky bottom. Adelaide had nearly reached the calf, her arms outstretched, when the current caught her skirts and pulled her sideways. She stumbled, went under for a moment, came up sputtering and still reaching for the terrified animal. Aaron caught her around the waist with one arm while he grabbed for the calf with the other. His fingers closed on wet hide, and he hauled the bawling creature against his chest. Adelaide clung to him, her fingers digging into his shirt, and together they fought their way back toward the bank. The river tried to claim them 3 times, pulling at their legs, but Aaron planted his feet and pushed forward, the woman pressed against his side and the calf thrashing in his grip. When they finally stumbled onto the muddy shore, all 3 of them collapsed in a heap, breathing hard. The calf scrambled to its feet first, shaking itself and letting out an indignant bleat before trotting off toward the sound of cattle lowing in the distance. Adelaide lay on her back in the mud, her chest heaving, her dress plastered to her body. Aaron rolled onto his side, water streaming from his hair and clothes. For a moment, they just looked at each other. "That was the stupidest thing I've ever seen anyone do," Aaron said, but there was no anger in his voice, only wonder. Adelaide started to laugh. It bubbled up from somewhere deep inside her, breathless and genuine. "That calf didn't belong to anyone I know," she said between gasps. "I couldn't just let it drown. So you decided to drown with it." Aaron pushed himself up to sitting, wringing out his shirt tail. He was a tall man, lean and sun-weathered, with dark blonde hair and eyes the color of sage. There was a scar above his left eyebrow and calluses on his hands that spoke of hard work. "I wasn't planning to drown," Adelaide said, sitting up as well. She pushed her wet hair back from her face, and Aaron noticed that her eyes were an unusual shade of green, like new grass after rain. "I'm a strong swimmer. In a swimming hole, maybe, that spring runoff, you could have been swept all the way to the Stanislaus River." Aaron stood and offered her his hand. After a moment's hesitation, she took it. Her palm was small in his, but her grip was firm. "Well, I wasn't," she said, getting to her feet. Her dress was ruined, covered in mud and river weed, and she had lost one of her stockings somewhere in the water. She looked down at herself and sighed. "My aunt is going to have words with me. You live around here?" Aaron asked. He had been working a ranch about 10 miles south of Columbia, California for the past 3 months, but he didn't recognize her. "My aunt and uncle run the boarding house in Columbia," Adelaide said. She looked around for her basket and found it caught in some willow branches, its contents scattered. "The Golden Eagle. I've been living with them since February." Aaron had stayed at the Golden Eagle once when he first arrived in the area. It was a respectable establishment, clean and well run by a middle-aged couple named Harris. "I know it," he said. He walked over to retrieve her basket, gathering up the scattered herbs as best he could. Most of them were waterlogged and useless now. "Thank you," Adelaide said when he handed it to her. She looked at the soggy plants and made a face. "I spent all morning gathering those, wild mint and yarrow for my aunt's remedies." "I reckon you can gather more," Aaron said. He picked up his hat, which had somehow stayed on through the whole ordeal, and squeezed the water out of it. "I'm Aaron Nichols. I work at the Double Bar Ranch. Adelaide Vaughn." She wrung out her skirts as best she could, though it was a losing battle. "Most people call me Addie." "Well, Miss Addie, we should probably get you back to town before you catch your death. It might be April, but that water is still ice cold." Aaron walked back to where his gelding was waiting patiently, grazing on new grass. The horse looked at him with what he could have sworn was amusement. "I can walk," Adelaide said, but she was starting to shiver. "It's 5 miles to Columbia and you're soaked through," Aaron said. He swung up into the saddle and held out his hand again. "Come on, Buck here won't mind carrying double." Adelaide looked at him for a long moment, as if weighing her options. Then she took his hand and let him pull her up behind him. She settled onto the horse's back, her wet skirts bunched around her legs, and after a moment's hesitation, wrapped her arms around Aaron's waist to steady herself. The ride back to Columbia took the better part of an hour. At first, they were both too uncomfortable to talk much, focused on the cold seeping into their bones. But as the afternoon sun began to warm them, Adelaide relaxed her grip slightly. "How long have you been working at the Double Bar?" she asked. "Since January," Aaron said. "I came out from Nevada after the winter set in. Figured California might be a bit milder." "Where in Nevada?" "Virginia City." Aaron guided Buck around a fallen log. "I worked the Comstock mines for a while, but I got tired of being underground. Figured I'd rather see the sky while I work, even if it means eating more dust." "I can understand that," Adelaide said. She rested her cheek against his back, and Aaron tried not to notice how that made him feel. "I came from Sacramento. I was working as a seamstress, but then my father died in January and my mother had already passed 3 years before. My aunt wrote and said I could come stay with them for a while, help out at the boarding house." "I'm sorry about your father," Aaron said quietly. "Thank you." Her voice was soft. "He was a good man, a clerk at the land office. He just got a fever one day and it took him within a week." They fell silent after that, but it was a comfortable silence. Adelaide's shivering had stopped and Aaron could feel her warmth against his back, even through their wet clothes. By the time Columbia came into view, he found himself reluctant to see the ride end. Columbia was a bustling gold rush town that had refused to die even after the easy gold was gone. Main Street was lined with brick buildings and wooden storefronts, saloons and mercantiles and assay offices. The Golden Eagle boarding house sat on a corner lot near the north end of town, a 2-story structure with a wide porch and cheerful yellow curtains in the windows. Aaron reined Buck to a stop in front of the building and helped Adelaide slide down. A woman came rushing out of the front door, her face a mask of concern. "Adelaide Vaughn, what on earth happened to you?" The woman was in her 40s, plump and kind-faced, wearing a practical calico dress and an apron. "You're soaked through." "I'm fine, Aunt Margaret," Adelaide said quickly. "There was a calf in the river and I went in after it." "You went in after it?" Margaret Harris looked at Adelaide as if she had announced she could fly. "Girl, that river is running faster than a locomotive right now. Mr. Nichols helped me," Adelaide said, gesturing to Aaron. "We got the calf out safe." Margaret turned her attention to Aaron, taking in his wet clothes and the water still dripping from his hat. Her expression softened. "Mr. Nichols, I'm grateful to you for looking after my niece, though I suspect she's the one who put you in danger in the first place." "It was no trouble, madam," Aaron said, though that was stretching the truth considerably. "I'm just glad we both came out of it in one piece." "Well, you come inside this instant," Margaret said, addressing both of them. "I'll have my husband stoke up the fire and we'll get you both dried out. Adelaide, you go straight upstairs and get out of those clothes before you catch pneumonia." Adelaide hesitated, looking at Aaron. "Thank you," she said, "for following me in. I know it was foolish." "It was brave," Aaron said, surprising himself. "Foolish too, but brave." A smile flickered across her face, and then she was hurrying inside, leaving wet footprints on the porch boards. Margaret ushered Aaron inside as well, insisting that he at least warm himself by the fire before heading back to the ranch. The interior of the Golden Eagle was homey and well kept, with braided rugs on the floors and a large parlor where guests could gather. A fire was crackling in the stone fireplace, and Aaron was grateful to stand before it, feeling the warmth seep back into his bones. William Harris, Margaret's husband, appeared with a blanket and a cup of hot coffee. He was a stocky man with graying hair and a weathered face, dressed in work clothes that suggested he had been out in the garden. "Margaret tells me you pulled my niece out of the river," William said, shaking Aaron's hand firmly. "We're indebted to you." "She was already pulling a calf out when I got there," Aaron said. "I just made sure she didn't get swept downstream doing it." William chuckled. "That sounds like Adelaide. Got a heart bigger than the whole Sierra Nevada, always trying to save something or someone." Aaron sipped his coffee, letting the hot liquid warm him from the inside. Through the ceiling, he could hear footsteps moving around in the room above, and he found himself wondering which room was Adelaide's. "You working at the double bar, you said?" William asked, settling into a chair by the fire. "Yes, sir. Been there about 3 months now. Good outfit. The foreman's fair and the pay is steady." "That's John Mercer's place, isn't it? I've met him a few times in town. Solid man." William puffed on his pipe thoughtfully. "You planning to stay in the area, for now?" Aaron said. "I'm not much for putting down roots, but I like it well enough here." They talked for a while about the ranch and the town, about the way Columbia had changed since the gold rush days. William had been in California since 1851, had worked claims and seen fortunes won and lost. Margaret had come west in 1853, a mail-order bride who had fallen in love with her husband for real within a month of meeting him. Adelaide came back downstairs about half an hour later, dressed in a simple blue cotton dress, her hair still damp but combed and pinned up neatly. She had color back in her cheeks, and she moved with an easy grace that made Aaron look twice. "Feeling better?" Margaret asked, looking up from her knitting. "Much," Adelaide said. She looked at Aaron. "Have you warmed up?" "I have, thanks to your aunt and uncle's hospitality," Aaron said. He set down his empty coffee cup and stood. "I should be getting back. It's a long ride to the ranch and I've got evening chores." "At least let me give you something for your trouble," William said, starting to reach for his pocket. "No, sir, I don't want any payment," Aaron said quickly. "Anyone would have done the same." "Not anyone," Adelaide said softly. "Most people wouldn't have followed me into that river." Aaron met her eyes and felt something shift inside his chest, something he couldn't quite name. "Well," he said, "I reckon I'm not most people." He made his goodbyes and headed back outside to where Buck was waiting, now dry and looking much more comfortable. As Aaron swung up into the saddle, Adelaide appeared on the porch. "Mr. Nichols," she called. He turned Buck to face her. "Yes, Miss Vaughn, will you come back?" The question seemed to surprise her as much as it did him. She colored slightly. "I mean for supper or something, to repay you for your help today." Aaron found himself smiling. "I'd like that. When?" "Sunday. We usually have a nice supper after church. You could join us if you're not working." "Sunday it is," Aaron said. He touched the brim of his hat to her and rode off, but he could feel her watching him until he turned the corner onto Main Street. The ride back to the double bar gave Aaron plenty of time to think. He had never been the type to get tangled up with a woman. His life had been too transient, moving from job to job, town to town. He had seen what happened to cowboys who fell in love and tried to settle down, the way it could make a man soft and distracted. But something about Adelaide Vaughn had gotten under his skin in the space of a single afternoon. When he got back to the ranch, the other hands teased him about his bedraggled appearance until he told them the story. Then they teased him about the girl instead. "A river rescue," said Pete Martinez, one of the older hands, grinning widely. "That's about the most romantic thing I've heard in years, Nichols. You going to see her again?" "Sunday supper," Aaron admitted, which brought a round of whoops and hollers from the bunkhouse. "Better polish your boots," said young Tommy Sullivan, barely 20 and always ready with advice he had no business giving. "And get yourself a proper shave. Ladies notice that kind of thing." Aaron threw a wadded-up shirt at him, but he was smiling. Sunday took forever to arrive. Aaron worked through the week like always, riding fence lines and moving cattle to fresh pasture, helping to break a new horse that the foreman had bought from a trader passing through. But his mind kept wandering back to Adelaide, to the way she had laughed lying in the mud, to the feel of her arms around his waist on the ride back to town. When Sunday finally came, Aaron did polish his boots and shave carefully, trimming his mustache and slicking his hair back with water. He put on his best shirt, a dark blue cotton one that he usually saved for special occasions, and his good vest. The other hands whistled and cackled as he rode out, but he ignored them. The ride to Columbia felt longer than usual, though Buck kept a steady pace. Aaron arrived at the Golden Eagle just as the church bells were ringing in the distance, signaling the end of the service. He hitched Buck to the rail out front and climbed the porch steps, suddenly nervous in a way he hadn't been since he was a teenager courting Mary Ann Brennan back in Kansas. Margaret answered his knock with a warm smile. "Mr. Nichols, right on time. Come in, come in. Adelaide will be so pleased you came." The boarding house smelled amazing, rich scents of roasted chicken and fresh baked bread filling the air. Margaret led Aaron into the dining room, where a long table was set for what looked like a dozen people. Adelaide was there, arranging glasses, and she looked up when he entered. She was wearing a deep green dress that matched her eyes, with little white buttons up the front and lace at the collar. Her hair was arranged in an intricate style that must have taken an hour, and she was smiling at him in a way that made his heart do something complicated in his chest. "You came," she said, and there was relief in her voice, as if she had been half afraid he wouldn't. "I said I would," Aaron replied. He held out a small bouquet of wildflowers he had picked on the way into town, yellow buttercups and purple lupine. "These are for you." Adelaide took the flowers, her fingers brushing his, and her smile widened. "They're beautiful, thank you." The other boarders began to arrive, and Aaron found himself seated between Adelaide and an elderly gentleman named Mr. Patterson, who had worked as a surveyor for the Central Pacific Railroad. The table filled up with conversation and laughter, plates passed back and forth, and Aaron felt himself relaxing into the warmth of it all. Adelaide was an easy person to talk to. She asked questions and actually listened to the answers, laughed at his stories about life on the ranch, told him about her work helping her aunt run the boarding house. She had a sharp wit and a quick mind, and Aaron found himself wanting to know everything about her. After supper, when the dishes had been cleared and the other boarders had drifted off to their rooms or the parlor, Adelaide suggested they sit on the porch for a while. The evening was mild, with a soft breeze carrying the scent of lilacs from somewhere nearby. They sat in the porch swing, not quite touching but close enough that Aaron could feel the warmth of her presence. The street was quiet, most of the town settled in for the evening. "I've been thinking about that calf all week," Adelaide said after a while. "Wondering if it made it back to its mother." "Probably did," Aaron said. "Cattle are pretty good at finding each other, and that little one had plenty of fight in it." Recognizes like," Adelaide said with a smile. "That calf was a fighter and so are you. What makes you say that?" "You followed me into that river without hesitation. That takes a certain kind of courage or stubbornness." Her eyes were teasing. "Maybe both." "Definitely both," Aaron admitted. "My mother used to say I was the most stubborn child she ever raised, and she raised 4 boys. Where is she now?" "Your mother," Aaron's expression clouded. "She died when I was 17. Cholera epidemic that came through our town in Kansas. Took her and my youngest brother both." "I'm so sorry," Adelaide said, and her hand found his on the bench between them. "That must have been terrible." "It was a long time ago," Aaron said, though the ache of it never quite went away. "My father passed a year later. Just gave up, I think, without my mother there. My 2 older brothers stayed to run the farm, but I couldn't. Every inch of that place reminded me of what we'd lost, so I headed west." "That was brave too," Adelaide said. "Starting over somewhere new." "Or it was running away," Aaron said. "I've never been quite sure which." "Maybe it's both," Adelaide said. "Maybe most brave things feel a little bit like running away." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the stars come out one by one in the darkening sky. Aaron was intensely aware of Adelaide's hand still resting on his, small and warm and real. "Can I ask you something?" Adelaide said eventually. "Anything." "Why did you really follow me into that river? You didn't know me. That calf wasn't yours. You could have just let me go." Aaron thought about it for a moment, trying to find the right words. "I've been drifting for a long time," he said slowly. "Just moving from place to place, not really connected to anything or anyone. And then I saw you, this stranger willing to risk her life for a creature that wasn't her responsibility, and something in me just reacted. I couldn't let you do it alone." Adelaide turned to look at him, and in the lamplight spilling from the windows, her eyes were luminous. "I'm glad you did," she said softly. Aaron leaned in, drawn by something he couldn't resist, and Adelaide met him halfway. Their kiss was gentle at first, tentative, and then deeper as Adelaide's hand came up to rest against his jaw. She tasted like the apple pie they had eaten for dessert, sweet and perfect, and Aaron felt something in him finally settle, like he had been searching for something all his life and had just found it. When they pulled apart, Adelaide was smiling. "That was nice," she said. "Yeah," Aaron agreed, a little breathless. "It was." They sat together on the porch until the night grew cool and Margaret called Adelaide inside. Aaron rode back to the ranch with his heart feeling lighter than it had in years. And when he got back to the bunkhouse, he ignored the knowing grins of the other hands and fell asleep thinking about green eyes and a laugh that sounded like music. After that, Aaron found reasons to ride into Columbia at least twice a week. Sometimes he would bring supplies that the ranch hands needed or deliver a message from the foreman to one of the merchants. But mostly, he went to see Adelaide. They fell into an easy rhythm. Adelaide would walk with him down to the river where they first met, and they would sit on the bank and talk for hours. She told him about her childhood in Sacramento, about helping her mother with sewing and learning to read from her father's books. She talked about the grief of losing both parents so young, about the loneliness of being 22 years old and feeling like the whole world had moved on without her. Aaron told her about Kansas and the farm, about working the mines in Nevada and the men he had known there. He told her about the beauty of the Sierra Nevada in spring, about the satisfaction of a hard day's work and a job done well. He told her things he had never told anyone, about the fear that he would drift forever and never find a place to belong. "You belong here," Adelaide said one afternoon in May as they sat by the river watching the water flow past. The current had calmed considerably since that first day, the spring runoff easing as the weather warmed. "With me." Aaron looked at her, at the certainty in her eyes, and felt something shift inside him. "You mean that?" he asked. "I do," Adelaide said. She took his hand, lacing her fingers through his. "I know it's only been a few weeks, but I've never felt this way about anyone before. Like I could tell you anything and you would understand. Like we fit together." "I feel it too," Aaron said. He brought her hand to his lips and kissed her knuckles gently. "I love you, Adelaide Vaughn. I didn't think I was capable of falling this hard or this fast, but I do. I love you." Adelaide's eyes filled with tears, but she was smiling. "I love you too, Aaron Nichols. From the moment you followed me into that river." They kissed there by the water, with the afternoon sun warm on their faces and the sound of birds singing in the cottonwoods. It felt like a promise, like the beginning of something that could last forever, but life in the West was never simple. A few days later, word came to the double bar that there had been trouble with some of the cattle. Several head had gone missing from the north pasture, and there were signs that they had been driven off rather than wandering away on their own. John Mercer, the ranch owner, called a meeting with all his hands. He was a big man in his 50s, gray-haired and serious, but fair to those who worked for him. "I'm not saying it's rustlers for certain," Mercer said, standing in the ranch yard with his men gathered around, "but I'm not ruling it out either. Pete, I want you to take Tommy and ride the north fence line. See if you can find where they might have cut through. Aaron, you and Jim head up to the high pasture and count the herd there. Make sure we're not missing more than we think." Aaron nodded and went to saddle Buck. Jim Wheeler, another hand in his 30s, joined him, and they rode out together toward the high country. It was a full day's ride to the summer pasture where they kept some of the breeding stock, and they would have to camp overnight before heading back. As they rode, Aaron found his thoughts drifting back to Adelaide. He had been thinking lately about the future, about what it might be like to stay in one place for more than a season. He had never been a man with a plan, but Adelaide made him want to be. She made him want to build something, to put down roots, to have a reason to come home at the end of the day. "You've got it bad, don't you?" Jim said, and Aaron realized he had been smiling like a fool. "That obvious?" Aaron asked. "You've been walking around with your head in the clouds for weeks," Jim said with a grin. "The girl from Columbia, right? The one you pulled out of the river, Adelaide," Aaron said, liking the feel of her name on his tongue. "Yeah, I'm thinking about asking her to marry me." Jim let out a low whistle. "That's serious. You sure you're ready for that? Marriage is a big step." "I'm sure," Aaron said, and he was. "I've never been more sure of anything in my life." They reached the high pasture by late afternoon and started the count. The cattle were scattered across several acres of good grass, and it took them a few hours to get an accurate number. When they were finished, Aaron was relieved to find that they weren't missing any from this group. Whatever had happened in the north pasture seemed to be an isolated incident. They made camp as the sun was setting, building a small fire and cooking beans and bacon in a pan. The night was clear and cold, the stars so bright they seemed close enough to touch. "You got any plans for how you're going to propose?" Jim asked as they sat by the fire. "Not yet," Aaron admitted. "I want it to be special. She deserves something special." "Women like that sort of thing," Jim agreed. "My wife, God rest her, she used to tell me that I could have done a better job with my proposal. I just sort of asked her one day while we were feeding the chickens. She said yes, But she never let me forget that it wasn't very romantic. When did you lose her? Aaron asked gently. 4 years ago, complications in childbirth. The baby too. Jim stared into the fire, his face shadowed. That's why I stick to ranch work now. Can't go back to that house we built together, can't bear the memories. I'm sorry, Aaron said, and he meant it. Don't be sorry, Jim said. Just love her while you have her. Love her hard and don't waste a single day, because you never know how much time you get. They rode back to the ranch the next day with the news that the high pasture herd was intact. Pete and Tommy had found where the fence had been cut in the north section, and tracks suggested that about 10 head had been driven off toward the mining camps in the foothills. It wasn't a huge loss, but it was troubling. Mercer decided to post guards on the herds at night, rotating the hands so that someone was always watching. It meant longer hours and less time off, but no one complained. Ranch work was like that sometimes, busy and unpredictable. Aaron managed to get into Columbia the following Sunday, and he arrived at the Golden Eagle to find Adelaide in the garden behind the boarding house, working in a vegetable patch. She was wearing an old dress and a wide-brimmed hat, her hands dirty from planting, and she looked beautiful. "Are you ever going to stop sneaking up on me?" she asked, looking up with a smile. "I wasn't sneaking," Aaron protested, though he had deliberately approached quietly just to see if she would notice. "You were just focused on your work." Adelaide stood and brushed the dirt from her hands. "Aunt Margaret wants tomatoes and beans this summer, so I'm getting the garden started. It's peaceful work." They walked together down to the river, as had become their habit. Aaron had brought a blanket, and they spread it out on the bank and sat down. The water burbled past, clear and bright in the June sunshine. "I've been thinking," Aaron said, taking Adelaide's hand, "about the future, about us." Adelaide turned to look at him, and there was something in her eyes that suggested she knew what was coming. "What about us?" Aaron took a deep breath. This was harder than he had expected, his heart pounding in his chest. "I love you, Adelaide, more than I thought it was possible to love someone. And I know we haven't known each other very long, only a couple of months, but I can't imagine my life without you in it." "Aaron," Adelaide said softly, her eyes bright with tears. "I'm not a rich man," Aaron continued, wanting to get it all out. "I'm just a ranch hand. But I work hard and I'm honest, and I would spend every day of the rest of my life trying to make you happy if you would let me." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small ring. It was simple, just a thin gold band with a tiny diamond, but it was the best he could afford. "Adelaide Vaughn, will you marry me?" Adelaide looked at the ring, then at Aaron's face, and her tears spilled over. "Yes," she said, her voice breaking. "Yes, of course I will marry you." Aaron slipped the ring onto her finger, and it fit perfectly, as if it had been made for her. Then he pulled her into his arms and kissed her, pouring all his love and hope and promise into that kiss. Adelaide kissed him back with equal fervor, her arms around his neck, and for a long moment the rest of the world faded away. When they finally pulled apart, Adelaide was laughing and crying at the same time. "I can't believe this is real," she said. "I can't believe I found you." "You didn't find me," Aaron said with a grin. "You were too busy trying to drown yourself saving a calf. I found you." Adelaide laughed and swatted his arm. "We found each other. That's what matters." They spent the rest of the afternoon making plans. They would need to talk to Margaret and William to get their blessing. They would need to figure out where they would live, how they would support themselves. Aaron had some money saved, and he thought he might be able to buy a small piece of land, start his own herd. It wouldn't be easy, but with Adelaide by his side, he felt like he could do anything. Margaret and William were thrilled when Adelaide and Aaron told them the news that evening. Margaret cried and hugged Adelaide, and William shook Aaron's hand with a grip that spoke volumes about his approval. "You take care of our girl," William said, his voice gruff with emotion. "She's all the family we have." "I will, sir," Aaron promised. "With my life." They decided to be married in August, giving them time to make preparations and for Aaron to find them a place to live. Word spread quickly through Columbia, and Adelaide found herself the recipient of congratulations from nearly everyone in town. The ladies at church threw her a small party, gifting her with linens and kitchen goods. The merchants gave her discounts on things she would need to set up a household. Aaron, meanwhile, talked to John Mercer about his plans. Mercer was understanding but practical. "I hate to lose a good hand," Mercer said, leaning against the corral fence. "But I understand wanting to build something of your own. Tell you what, there's a piece of land adjacent to my north boundary. About 40 acres, good water, decent grass. The man who owned it moved back east last year and it's just sitting there. I could probably broker a deal for you, help you get started with a few head of cattle." "Why would you do that?" Aaron asked, surprised by the generosity. "Because you're a hard worker and an honest man, and those are qualities in short supply sometimes," Mercer said. "And because I've been where you are, wanting to build a life with a good woman. My wife, God rest her soul, she believed in helping young people get started. I like to honor her memory when I can." Aaron felt a lump in his throat. "I don't know how to thank you, sir." "Just make a go of it," Mercer said. "That'll be thanks enough." Over the next 2 months, Aaron worked harder than he had ever worked in his life. He spent his days at the double bar and his evenings and weekends building a cabin on the land Mercer had helped him acquire. It was back-breaking labor, felling trees and trimming logs, notching them together to form walls. Jim and Pete and some of the other hands helped when they could, and slowly, the cabin took shape. Adelaide came to visit the building site several times, bringing lunch and helping where she could. She had opinions about where things should go, about the size of the windows and the placement of the fireplace, and Aaron found that he loved hearing her talk about their future home. "We should have a garden here," Adelaide said one day, pacing off a sunny spot near the cabin. "And maybe a chicken coop over there. I can keep chickens for eggs." "Whatever you want," Aaron said, pausing in his work to watch her. She was wearing a simple calico dress and her hair was coming loose from its pins, and he thought he had never seen anything more beautiful. By late July, the cabin was finished enough to be livable. It was small, just 2 rooms and a loft, but it was solid and tight and it was theirs. Aaron built furniture from scrap lumber, a table and chairs, a bed frame that he fitted with a mattress stuffed with straw. Adelaide brought curtains she had sewn and rugs she had woven, and together they made the bare little cabin into a home. They were married on a Saturday in mid-August, in the small church in Columbia. The whole town seemed to turn out for the wedding. Adelaide wore a dress she had made herself, simple white cotton with lace at the collar and cuffs, and she carried a bouquet of wildflowers. Aaron wore his best clothes, his boots polished to a mirror shine, and when Adelaide walked down the aisle on William's arm, he felt tears prick at his eyes. The ceremony was simple and beautiful. They exchanged vows and rings, and when the minister told Aaron he could kiss his bride, Aaron did so with a tenderness that made more than one woman in the congregation reach for a handkerchief. The reception was held at the Golden Eagle, with food and music and dancing. Aaron danced with Adelaide until his feet hurt, and then he danced with her some more. When the sun began to set and people started to drift away, Aaron helped Adelaide into the wagon he had borrowed from the ranch, and they drove out to their new home in the gathering darkness. The cabin looked beautiful in the lamplight, warm and welcoming. Aaron carried Adelaide over the threshold, both of them laughing, and set her down gently inside. They stood in the center of the room, holding each other, and Adelaide rested her head against Aaron's chest. "I love you, Mrs. Nichols," Aaron said, and the name sounded perfect. "I love you too, Mr. Nichols," Adelaide replied. She looked up at him, her green eyes bright in the lamplight. Now and forever. They kissed, and it was sweet and full of promise. The rest of the evening was theirs alone, the beginning of a life they would build together. The months that followed were full of hard work, but also deep joy. Aaron worked their land, building up a small herd with the cattle Mercer had sold him at a fair price. He mended fences and cut hay, broke horses and did odd jobs for neighboring ranches when money was tight. Adelaide kept the house, tended her garden, and raised chickens that provided them with eggs to eat and sell. She also continued to help Margaret at the boarding house a few days a week, earning a bit of extra money and staying connected to her aunt and uncle. They were poor by some standards, but they had everything they needed. They had each other, and that was enough. As autumn turned to winter and then winter to spring, Adelaide began to notice changes in her body. By April of 1873 she was certain, and when she told Aaron, he lifted her off her feet and spun her around, whooping with joy. "We're going to have a baby," he kept saying, as if he couldn't quite believe it. "We're going to be parents." "We are," Adelaide said, laughing at his exuberance. In late September or early October, the doctor thinks. Aaron was beside himself with excitement and nervousness. He fussed over Adelaide, insisting she not work too hard, trying to take on all the heavy chores himself. Adelaide had to remind him regularly that she was pregnant, not ill, and that she was perfectly capable of feeding chickens and hoeing the garden. But she loved his attentiveness, the way he would rest his hand on her belly as it grew, talking to their unborn child. She loved the way he looked at her, with wonder and adoration, as if she were performing some kind of miracle. And maybe she was. The baby came in early October, after a long labor that left Adelaide exhausted but triumphant. The doctor from Columbia was there, as was Margaret, and when Aaron was finally allowed into the room, he found Adelaide propped up in bed, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in a blanket. "Meet your son," Adelaide said, smiling tiredly up at him. Aaron approached slowly, almost afraid, and looked down at the baby in Adelaide's arms. The infant had a red, scrunched-up face and a dusting of dark hair, and Aaron fell in love instantly and completely. "A son," he whispered. He reached out and touched the baby's tiny hand, and the infant's fingers curled around his, gripping with surprising strength. What should we name him? They had discussed names but never settled on anything definite. Now, looking at their child, Adelaide said, "What about James?" "After your brother," Aaron's eyes filled with tears. His older brother James still lived in Kansas, and they exchanged letters a few times a year. It was a good name, a family name. "James Nichols," he said, testing it out. "I like that. James William, after both our families." "Perfect," Adelaide said. She was exhausted, dark circles under her eyes, but she had never looked more beautiful to Aaron. James William Nichols. Little Jamie, as they took to calling him, was a healthy, hungry baby who kept them up at all hours. Aaron learned to change diapers and soothe a crying infant, walking the floor at 2 in the morning while Adelaide tried to catch a few hours of sleep. It was exhausting and overwhelming and absolutely wonderful. Watching Adelaide with their son filled Aaron with an emotion so profound, it was almost painful. She was patient and loving, even when Jamie cried for hours with colic, even when she was so tired she could barely stand. She sang to him and rocked him and loved him with a fierceness that took Aaron's breath away. Life on the small ranch was busy. Aaron continued to build up their herd, and by the spring of 1874, they had nearly 30 head of cattle. It was enough to provide a modest income, especially when combined with Adelaide's egg money and occasional seamstress work. They were making it, slowly but surely building a life. Jamie grew from an infant to a toddler, curious and energetic, getting into everything. He had Adelaide's green eyes and Aaron's stubborn chin, and he was the light of their lives. Aaron taught him to ride almost as soon as he could walk, setting him on the saddle in front of him and walking Buck around the yard. Jamie would shriek with laughter, his hands tangled in Buck's mane, fearless and happy. In the fall of 1875, Adelaide discovered she was pregnant again. This time, she knew what to expect, and the pregnancy was easier in some ways, harder in others. Jamie was a handful, constantly demanding attention, and Adelaide was more tired than she had been the first time around. Their daughter was born in May of 1876, just as the wildflowers were blooming across the hills. She came quickly, much faster than Jamie had, and by the time the doctor arrived from Columbia, Adelaide had already delivered the baby with just Aaron and Margaret's help. "A girl," Aaron said, his voice choked with emotion as he cut the umbilical cord with shaking hands. "We have a daughter." They named her Sarah Margaret, after Adelaide's mother and Margaret Harris. Sarah was smaller than Jamie had been, more delicate, with wispy blonde hair and blue eyes that Aaron swore would turn green like her mother's eventually. With 2 children, life became even more complicated. Money was tight, and there were times when Aaron worried about making ends meet. But somehow they always managed. Adelaide was resourceful, finding ways to stretch every penny, making their clothes last longer, preserving food from the garden to get them through the winter. The children grew, and the ranch grew with them. By 1878, Aaron had nearly 50 head of cattle and had hired a young man to help with the work. Jamie was 5 years old and followed Aaron everywhere, wanting to help with everything. Sarah was 2, a sweet-natured child who loved animals and spent hours playing with the barn cats. Adelaide had found her place in the world. She was a mother and a wife, but she was also a valued member of the community. She helped Margaret at the boarding house when she could, took in sewing when money was tight, and was known throughout Columbia as a woman who would help anyone in need. More than once, Aaron came home to find Adelaide tending to a sick neighbor or watching someone else's children so their mother could rest. "You have the biggest heart of anyone I've ever known," Aaron told her one evening as they sat on the porch after the children were asleep. "You're always taking care of someone. I learned from the best," Adelaide said, leaning into his side. "You followed me into that river to save a calf that wasn't even ours. You showed me what it means to care about something beyond yourself." Aaron kissed the top of her head. "That seems like a lifetime ago, 6 years," Adelaide said. 6 years since the best day of my life. The day you nearly drowned. The day I met you," Adelaide corrected with a smile. As the years passed, their love only deepened. There were hard times, certainly. A bad winter in 1879 when they lost several head of cattle to cold and starvation. A drought in 1881 that left their pastures brown and their cattle thin. But they weathered every storm together, leaning on each other, never giving up. Jamie grew into a capable young man, taking on more and more responsibility on the ranch. Sarah was quieter but just as capable, with a gift for gentling horses that amazed everyone who saw it. In 1883, Adelaide gave birth to another son, whom they named Thomas Aaron. And in 1886, their family was completed with the arrival of twin daughters, whom they named Elizabeth and Catherine. 5 children, a growing ranch, and a love that had only strengthened with time. Aaron and Adelaide's cabin had been expanded over the years, new rooms added as their family grew. The little 40-acre homestead had grown to over 200 acres, with a respectable herd and a good reputation throughout the county. But even more than the land or the livestock, what Aaron and Adelaide had built was a family. Their children grew up knowing they were loved, watching their parents work side by side, seeing the way Aaron looked at Adelaide even after 15 years of marriage, as if she were the most precious thing in the world. On a warm April evening in 1888, Aaron and Adelaide sat on their porch, much as they had countless times before. The children were inside, the older ones helping the younger ones get ready for bed. The sun was setting over the hills, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink. "Do you ever think about that day?" Adelaide asked, watching the sunset. "The day we met, all the time," Aaron said. He took her hand, running his thumb over her knuckles in a gesture that had become as familiar as breathing. "I think about how different my life would be if I hadn't seen you wade into that river, if I hadn't followed you in. We might never have met," Adelaide said. "Or we might have met some other way," Aaron said. "I like to think we would have found each other somehow. Some things are just meant to be." Adelaide turned to look at him, and even after 16 years his breath still caught at the sight of her. She had lines at the corners of her eyes now, and silver threads in her auburn hair, but she was still the most beautiful woman he had ever seen. "I love you, Aaron Nichols," she said. "Just as much as I did the day I married you, more even because now I know what it means to build a life with someone, to weather storms together, to raise children and chase dreams and never give up on each other." "I love you too, Adelaide," Aaron said. "You're my heart, my home, everything that matters. Following you into that river was the best decision I ever made." They kissed as the sun set, two people who had found in each other exactly what they needed. A love born from a moment of reckless compassion, forged in hard work and devotion, and tested by time and circumstance. A love that had only grown stronger with each passing year. Inside the house, they could hear their children laughing, the sound of family and home and everything they had built together. It was a good life, a full life, and as Aaron and Adelaide sat together on their porch, watching the stars come out one by one in the darkening sky, they knew without a doubt that they had found something rare and precious. They had found each other. The years continued to pass in a steady rhythm of seasons and hard work, love and laughter. Jamie married in 1892, bringing home a sweet-natured young woman named Helen from one of the neighboring ranches. They built a house on the far edge of Aaron and Adelaide's property, and Jamie took over much of the day-to-day running of the ranch, allowing Aaron to slow down a bit as he approached 50. Sarah proved to have an artistic temperament to go along with her skill with horses. She spent her free time sketching the landscape and the animals, and when a traveling art teacher came through Columbia, Margaret Harris sponsored Sarah's lessons. Her drawings became sought after throughout the county, and she supplemented the family income by selling her work. The younger children grew as well. Thomas was a serious boy, studious and thoughtful, with dreams of becoming a doctor. The twins, Elizabeth and Catherine, were inseparable and utterly fearless, always getting into some kind of mischief that reminded Aaron of Adelaide's impulsive rescue of that calf so many years ago. In 1895, Adelaide and Aaron became grandparents when Jamie and Helen welcomed their first child, a daughter they named Adelaide Rose. Holding his granddaughter for the first time, Aaron was overwhelmed with emotion. It seemed impossible that so much time had passed, that the young man who had followed a stranger into a river was now a grandfather. "Time moves so quickly," he said to Adelaide that night, as they prepared for bed in the room they had shared for 22 years. "It does," Adelaide agreed, settling under the covers beside him. "But we've filled it well, haven't we, with love and family and good work." "We have," Aaron said, pulling her close. Even after all these years, he still marveled at the gift of her presence beside him, the solid reality of a love that had endured. More grandchildren followed over the years. Jamie and Helen had 3 children in total. Sarah eventually married a rancher from the next county over, a kind man named Robert who appreciated her artistic nature and supported her dreams. They had 2 children and visited often, bringing energy and laughter to the ranch. Thomas did go on to become a doctor, studying in San Francisco and returning to Colombia to set up a practice. He married a teacher, and they had 4 children who all showed signs of inheriting their father's intelligence and compassion. The twins, Elizabeth and Catherine, remained close even as adults. Elizabeth married a merchant from Colombia and helped him run his store, while Catherine chose a more unconventional path, becoming a teacher at the local school. Both had families of their own, adding to the growing clan that gathered at the ranch for holidays and celebrations. As the new century dawned in 1900, Aaron and Adelaide found themselves at the center of a large and loving family. The little homestead they had started, with 40 acres, had grown to a prosperous ranch, spanning over 300 acres. Their children were all settled and happy, their grandchildren were thriving, and they had the satisfaction of knowing they had built something that would last beyond their own lives. But more than the land or the prosperity, what Aaron treasured most was the woman beside him. Adelaide was in her late 50s now, her hair mostly silver, her hands marked by decades of work. But to Aaron, she was still the brave, beautiful woman who had waded into a river to save a calf, still the person who had taught him what it meant to truly love someone. They sat together on their porch one evening in the spring of 1901, watching their grandchildren play in the yard. The air was warm and sweet with the scent of blooming fruit trees that Adelaide had planted years ago. "We've been blessed," Adelaide said softly, her hand in Aaron's. "Beyond what I ever dreamed possible when I was a lonely young woman in Sacramento, wondering what my life would become. I was blessed the day I met you," Aaron said. "Everything good in my life stems from that moment." "From a calf in a river," Adelaide said with a laugh. "Who would have thought I would," Aaron said, turning to look at her. "Because it wasn't really about the calf. It was about who you are, the kind of person who sees a creature in need and acts without thinking of the cost. That's what I fell in love with. That's what I've loved every day since." Adelaide's eyes filled with tears, but she was smiling. "And I fell in love with a man who would follow a stranger into danger, who would build a life from nothing, who would love me and our children with everything he had. You've given me the most beautiful life, Aaron." They kissed, a gentle press of lips that held 29 years of love and partnership, of struggles overcome and joys shared. Around them, their grandchildren played and laughed, the sound of their happiness echoing across the land that Aaron and Adelaide had built together. As the sun set over the California hills, painting the sky in brilliant colors, Aaron and Adelaide sat together in perfect contentment. They had started with nothing but love and determination, and they had built an empire of the heart. They had raised 5 children who were good and kind and capable. They had weathered every storm that life threw at them, always together, always supporting each other. The years ahead would bring more changes. There would be losses and sorrows mixed with the joys. But Aaron and Adelaide would face it all together, just as they always had, their love a constant through all the seasons of their lives. And it had all started with a moment of impulse. A woman wading into a river to save a calf that wasn't hers, and a man who followed her in, not knowing that he was following her into a lifetime of love. In 1905, on a warm summer afternoon, Adelaide was working in her garden when she paused to rest, feeling suddenly tired. She sat down on the bench Aaron had built for her years ago, positioned so she could look out over the valley and see the cattle grazing in the distance. Aaron found her there an hour later, having slipped away peacefully in the sunshine, a small smile on her face. She was 62 years old, and she had lived a full and beautiful life. Aaron's grief was profound and devastating. For 53 years, Adelaide had been the center of his world, and without her, he felt untethered, lost. But he was not alone in his sorrow. Their children gathered around him, along with their spouses and children, creating a circle of love and support that carried him through the darkest days. They buried Adelaide in a spot she had chosen years before, on a hill overlooking the river where they had first met. Aaron stood at the graveside, surrounded by their family, and spoke of the woman who had changed his life. "She was brave and kind and full of love," he said, his voice breaking. "She made me better than I ever thought I could be. She gave me a family, a home, a purpose. And every day of the 33 years we had together was a gift. After the funeral, life went on as it always does." Aaron remained on the ranch, though Jamie ran most of the operations now. He spent his days working in Adelaide's garden, tending the flowers and vegetables she had loved. He sat on the porch and watched his grandchildren and great-grandchildren play. He wrote letters to his brother in Kansas, long letters about memory and love and the passage of time. But most of all, he remembered. He remembered the first moment he saw Adelaide, the way she had waded into that river without hesitation. He remembered the feel of her hand in his, the sound of her laugh, the way she had looked at him on their wedding day. He remembered every moment they had shared, treasuring them like precious gems. Aaron lived for another 6 years, dying peacefully in his sleep in 1911 at the age of 65. His children buried him next to Adelaide on the hill overlooking the river, and they placed a single stone marker over both graves. It read simply, "Aaron and Adelaide Nichols, together forever." Their children and grandchildren continued to work the ranch, keeping alive the legacy that Aaron and Adelaide had built. The story of how they met became family legend, told and retold at gatherings, a reminder of the power of compassion and courage and love. The river still flowed past the ranch, its waters changing with the seasons but always moving forward, just as life moves forward. And on quiet afternoons, when the sun hit the water just right, you could almost imagine you saw them there. A young woman wading into the current and a young man following her in, the beginning of a love story that would last forever. Because true love never really ends. It lives on in the children who carry forward their parents' values, in the land that was nurtured and cared for, in the memories that are shared and cherished. Aaron and Adelaide's love lived on in every member of their family, in every act of kindness they inspired, in every moment of courage they exemplified. They had been ordinary people who had lived an extraordinary love story. They had faced hardships and challenges, had worked hard and sacrificed much, but they had done it all together. And in the end, that was what mattered most. Not the size of their ranch or the success of their children, but the fact that they had loved each other deeply and completely, from that first moment by the river until their last breath. Their story became part of the fabric of Columbia, California, woven into the town's history. Years later, people would still talk about Aaron and Adelaide Nichols, about the day she waded into the river to save a calf that wasn't hers and he followed her in. They would talk about the love that grew from that moment, about the family they built, about the legacy they left behind. And sometimes, on spring afternoons when the river was running high with snowmelt, locals swore they could see two figures by the water, holding hands and watching the current flow past. It was just a trick of the light, of course, shadows and sunshine playing on the moving water. But it was a comforting thought, the idea that some loves are so strong they transcend even death, that Aaron and Adelaide might still be together somewhere, still loving each other as fiercely as they did that very first day. Their great-great-grandchildren still worked parts of the original ranch land well into the 20th century, proud of their heritage, telling the story of Aaron and Adelaide to their own children and grandchildren. The cabin Aaron built with his own hands was carefully preserved, turned into a small museum of sorts, filled with Adelaide's drawings and Aaron's tools, with photographs and letters and mementos of a life well lived. In the museum, visitors could see Adelaide's wedding dress, carefully preserved, and Aaron's worn leather vest. They could see the ring he had given her, which had been passed down through generations of daughters and granddaughters. They could see the sketches Adelaide had made of their children, the letters Aaron had written to her when he had to travel to town on business. But more than the objects, what visitors felt when they walked through that cabin was the presence of love. It lingered in every corner, in the careful construction of the furniture Aaron had built, in the beautiful stitching on the quilts Adelaide had made. It was there in the journals they had kept, in the stories written down by their children, in every artifact of their shared life. Because Aaron and Adelaide had created something that lasted far beyond their own years. They had created a legacy of love, of hard work, of family. They had shown everyone who knew them what it meant to truly love another person, to build a life together through good times and bad, to never give up on each other or on the dreams you shared. And it had all started with a simple act of compassion, with a woman who saw a creature in distress and acted without thinking of the consequences, and with a man who recognized something special in that moment and chose to be part of it. The river still flows past that ranch, just as it has for thousands of years. The seasons still change, bringing snow in winter and flowers in spring. The land that Aaron and Adelaide worked so hard to build is still there, still productive, still home to their descendants. And on quiet evenings, when the sun sets over the California hills, you can almost hear their voices on the wind, laughing together, loving each other, living forever in the legacy they created, because some love stories never end. They just become part of the eternal fabric of the world, inspiring others, giving hope, reminding us all that true love is real and worth fighting for. Aaron and Adelaide's story was one of those love stories. It was real and messy and beautiful, filled with hardship and joy in equal measure, but always grounded in a love that never wavered. They had started with nothing but each other and a dream. They had built an empire of the heart. And though their physical bodies were long gone, their love lived on, immortal and perfect, a testament to the power of choosing to follow someone into the river, to take that leap of faith, to love with everything you have. In the end, that was their greatest legacy. Not the land or the wealth, or even the large and loving family they had created. It was the example they set of what love could be when two people committed to each other completely. It was the proof that true love exists, that it can last a lifetime, that it can overcome any obstacle. Aaron had followed Adelaide into that river on a spring day in 1872, and in doing so, he had found his destiny. They had lived and loved and built something beautiful together. And though they were gone, their story remained, a beacon of hope and inspiration for anyone who believed in the power of love. The river flows on, the seasons change, and time marches forward. But some things remain eternal. Love remains eternal. Hope remains eternal. And the story of a cowboy who watched a woman wade into a river to save a calf that wasn't hers, and who followed her in, will remain eternal as well. A reminder that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is follow your heart, wherever it leads you, and trust that love will guide the way home.